It's about a decade of democracy in China and Russia, which you would almost call
in December of last year with a very interesting and intentional title.
Jeff, it's very hard. You've got to be somehow the synthesis. But you've worked in both places. You have an understanding, I think, of how the systems work. What is your sense of, I mean, let's try to stick to the topic a bit, at least at the beginning, of democratic signs, movements in both countries. What's your take?
Yeah, my experience is that different societies have very deep-rooted political cultures and traditions that extend far back in history, and for good and for bad, and that these cultures are real, they are persistent, they are different, they don't rank on an easy scale that this is the best and this is the worst like we want to do. And we need an approach. I very much like what you said and agree with it. There are different narratives that are held, and these different narratives have merit. And the solution in a world of different narratives is to speak with each other more than we do. We in the United States, and I say we, what I really mean is our political elites, do not speak with Chinese political elites except to point fingers or to yell at them or to do other things. We certainly don't even shake hands with Russian leaders or diplomats. But I've lived my whole career for 42 years of active duty listening to different narratives and seeing those perspectives from different sides and finding a lot of merit in the various positions and saying if you would sit down to speak with each other, we'd actually get somewhere. So let me be specific.
Okay.
China looks today not completely different from the Han Dynasty, a centralized administrative state. And with Confucian culture, with a tradition of excellence of the Mandarins. When I speak with Chinese senior officials, which I do often, they are the best informed professionals I know in the world. When I deal with them, they know their brief. They're sophisticated, well-trained, occasionally my students. And they believe in professional excellence of a centralized administrative state. And that political culture is more than 2,000 years old. When you are looking at Russia, it looks a lot like Putin looks a lot like a Tsar. It's not an accident. That is a culture of authority and a culture of tradition. When I look at my own country, the United States, it is a semi-democratic, white-dominated, hierarchical, racist society that aims to preserve privilege by the elites. That's how it was formed in 1787. It was a slave-owning, genocidal country, killing Native Americans for a white culture. But amazingly, it still looks that way, although we're much more diverse now than we were.
Let me ask you this, Jeff, because this is...
I want to point out that these are deep cultural distinctions.
Right.
But we shouldn't just simplify because we say democracy and you know, these are, yes, it's important. What's important is actually the details. As I mentioned last night, Plato, democracy, that was the last thing on his mind. That was the enemy. The plus was a philosopher king, of course,
right,
in the Republic. And for Aristotle, it was much more subtle and complex of a system of governance that mixed governance by the one, by the few, and by the many, but on the good side of the ledger. And one more point I want to make about democracy, because we're in a democracy forum where we treat democracy as the good. The most violent country in the world in the 19th century, by far, was perhaps the most democratic or second most democratic, and that was Britain. You can be democratic at home and ruthlessly imperial abroad. The most violent country in the world since 1950 has been the United States. It's
Jeff,
been by far involved
Jeffrey,
in more,
stop
wait a
now.
minute, in more
Let's
wars.
Jeffrey, Jeffrey, I'm your moderator, and it's enough.
Okay, I'm done.
I'm not here to defend one system or another, nor am I here in any way except to facilitate a conversation and to stop speeches. So the question I'm going to ask you is democracy the wrong lens then, from what you've said, to be looking at these two countries, which is what's on the table, China and Russia?
Is it to be?
Is it the wrong lens
Yes.
through which to be looking at these two countries?
The single biggest mistake of President Biden is to say the great struggle of the world is between democracies and autocracies. The real struggle of the world is to live together and overcome our common crises of environment and inequality.
Good, thank you.
Thanks.
We've got about 7 minutes left. I want to go to you. I think there's a lot going on here, and I want you to keep it going. I'd like to first call on one of our students that we have here. You're very far away, so someone should stand up and raise their hand so I can see them. I see a young man with a hand way up in the air with a black shirt on. Yes, sir. Why don't you, but please try to ask a question and direct it to someone specific, if possible.
Okay, thank you very much for the discussion.
And introduce yourself.
Okay,
too.
I'm Tomáš Čoj from Slovakia, representing Global Liberal Arts Students Alliance here. I would like to ask Mr. Sachs, continuing on what he said yesterday, and he sort of pointed out it today as well. What you mentioned is that the United States and the West lacks moderation, and you sort of hinted on that as well. I come from Slovakia, as I've said, and I would like to ask you, what do you mean by your sentence or by your hint that the eastward expansion might have caused, or the NATO might have caused the invasion, and whether Slovakia as a sovereign country shouldn't have the right to decide where it belongs mainly NATO. Thank you.
That's clear. Let's take one more question from back there. Yes, sir.
Hi. Good morning, everybody. I'm from Hong Kong, and I'm representing the Global Liberal Arts Alliance, and I'm going to ask a question about that. So, Mr. Sachs, yeah, you just raised that we should, the top political agenda is to alleviate inequality instead of arguing with each other which one is not democratic or democratic. But there are indeed authoritarian regimes which are they really motivated to tackle inequality while they build gulags in Xinjiang, jailing students and dissolving civil society in Hong Kong, and fading a history of large-scale killings in the Cultural Revolution? Well, I'm risking my only freedom of speech of saying that because I live in Hong Kong. But is that hypocritical or morally decent for the West to collaborate with them to alleviate inequalities as the first agenda to solve, while not condemning their
That's
the
good.
dangers
It's clear. Thank you.
in a
Thank you. That's clear.
yeah, thank you.
Jeff, do you want to respond to those first?
Yeah. My view is that we need a world that operates under two major charters. One is the United Nations Charter, and the second is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is our moral charter. That's a multilateral charter. It is based on the idea of international cooperation that was envisioned after the horrors of World War II. It is, in my view, the basis for peace. In 1990, the basis for peace, when Gorbachev called for the end of the Warsaw Pact, was the end of NATO, actually, as well, and Europe living under a European security framework, and that's what the OSCE could provide. I've never been a fan of NATO since the end of the Soviet Union. NATO was a military alliance of the United States created to defend against a Soviet invasion of Western Europe. And the United States and Germany promised Gorbachev in 1990 explicitly that with the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact and with the reunification of Germany, NATO would not expand eastward. That promise was immediately reneged by Clinton and then by Bush, and then it has continued under Obama and under Trump, up to and including NATO in the Black Sea, which, if anyone knows the history of the Black Sea, is absolutely viewed by Russia as the core of Russian security. And so it is a pure provocation, in my view. And it is a predictable outcome that we have this kind of explosion. So to my mind, prudence, that was the idea that I was emphasizing yesterday. Prudence, which is one of the four virtues, practical wisdom, it's often translated, or phronesis in Greek, means situational awareness, that you act in a way which is wise. And that's what we are lacking right now. And I know exactly why we're lacking it, because in 1992, the leaders in my country, many of my colleagues at Harvard and elsewhere, said, we are now the unchallenged colossus of the world. We can do what we want.
Jeffrey.
And just to say, and wait, just let me, because he asked, I'm going to finish the answer, and then I will give the floor to you. Sorry. So, okay. Just to say, if you say who made most of the wars of recent years, first NATO bombed Serbia in 1999. UN, no way. The invasion of Iraq under complete lies, not misunderstanding, but lies. The CIA operation to overthrow Assad in 2009.
I think you've answered
the NATO
Jeff,
mission to overthrow
God's sake.
Gaddafi. And then we say, how can anyone launch a war? Well, 4 of the last 5 came from the United States side. And NATO enlargement did as well. We need some balance and prudence. That's my point.
You've answered the question last night at great length, and you've answered it again at great length. So,
honestly,
Yaroslav, respond, and then we're out of time.
Sure. I am a bit surprised because, as I have already said, in 1989 and afterwards, you, Jeffrey, promoted the liberty and democracy and values, not. And what it means, it means that today, if we try to blame the West for the war, it is to take away responsibility, a whole or a part, whatever, from Vladimir Putin. It was he who took the decision of leading a war in February. And we really, it's very ambiguous to take this responsibility out of him. That was his personal decision that he justified in many ways. And the second point, it is fascinating to me to see that your person, in particular, you were a promise for me for the liberty that eventually we could get out of these horrible spheres of influence and stand for the human rights and self-determination of nations, and in fact to get out of the trap of history. What it means not only for Poland, but for Estonia and Lithuania and Latvia, to get out of the history trap and
I understand. Jaroslav,
get out of 300 years of
listen.
Wait. For the God's sake, where are the human rights?
I've completely failed you as your moderator, for which I apologize. We have a really good conversation going. We will continue it later because the whole.
We're on the same side.
Oh, okay.
Explains one thing.
So 30 seconds, and then we have to keep going. And I do apologize. I love this conversation, but it's the wrong place to have it all day long.
I love your country, and I worked as hard as I possibly could for it. And I want you to know that when the Solidarity government took power with...
You were with us.
Not only I was helping to devise that with Prime Minister Mazowiecki, who made it possible? Mikhail Gorbachev. Actually, with the call with Adam Michnik, a very fascinating moment in history. So it's more complicated than this. We need both sides working together, and it's possible.
Great. I think we've explained a bit of what our complications are. We will keep talking because democracy is about debate. He says in a great cliche, but it's true. But let me now thank my panel and introduce Liz Alderman, who will do the next affair about photographs with Alexander Chekmenov, who's a Ukrainian photographer. So thank the panel and thank you all.